It's time to step out now into cosmos, into mythos, into psyche.
In poison, there is physic. Shakespeare said that. Our way is the way of poisons. Mercury, the poisonous changeling. Some plants like to lap you up, dog-like. Others hit you like a mallet. Once they get in you, they've got you. From then on, the plant poison is part of you. Our way is the way of poison. If you want sacredness, highly evolved consciousness, spiritual magnificence, holiness, sweetness, beauty, truth, good. Aspiration is halfway there. But our way is the way of poison, the path of sulfur. Everything is poison. Nothing is poison. Paracelsus said that. The old doctors were called poisoners. They were the lucky ones. Still today, we will say to someone, good luck. Your luck is your power. Your luck is your poison. A bit about the poison path from Dale Pendell, a man who we talk a lot about in this podcast. Pharmacopoeia, the trilogy, my favorite series of books, I still think so, to date. I highly recommend reading Dale Pendell. So welcome to another podcast, this one with my friend Kathryn Solie. She is on the poison path. She teaches us about the importance of these plants and how they can help us to work with our traumas and work with spirits. And it's just a fascinating conversation I think that many of you are going to enjoy. If you think of yourself as a witch, you're in. If you think of yourself as a wizard, you're in. And so you can check out Kathryn's work at kathrynsolie.com. The link is in the show notes. Solie is how you spell her last name. And how did Kathryn and I meet? We kind of tell that story. It wasn't in Boulder. It wasn't at Kucha where she used to work. It was through the Galactic Center, I think, which is kind of appropriate in the sense that after I had this conversation with Kathryn, I wanted to refresh myself on Dale's chart. I was like, what is it really about Dale that I love so much? And lo and behold, he and I have the same nodes that move from Sag to Gemini. And so I will be using him in the class on Sunday on the nodes moving into Sag Gemini. And as I was in that pursuit, I'm like, oh my goodness, like there's so many people that I feel that way about that have the same nodal axis as I do. And so this transition that is happening, we're going to talk all about it on Sunday. And so if you enjoy Kathryn and I's conversation, if you love this podcast, if at any moment you're like, oh, I've never thought about myself as a poisoner or walking along the poison path, consider going over to patreon.com/AdamSummer and you can support the podcast there, but also you can be a part of the class on Sunday for 50% off if you become a patron at the 10 or above level. And if you don't have $10, no worries. You can just go over to iTunes or in your podcast app and you can leave a review and some stars. And if you take a screenshot of it and you share it with me, you can be a part of the class with us on Sunday for free. But you have to send me that screenshot. These are ways that you could support the podcast. And so I'm excited about something as well. I noticed that last week the podcast surpassed 1 million listens, which kind of seems like a little number for 10 plus years of doing a podcast. But what I was really thinking about, like 1 million people pressing play to this podcast over the years. then it becomes a lot. I'm like, wow, 1 million people have taken a moment out of their lives to listen to these weird conversations. That means a lot to me. And so thank you for listening, even if you're not a supporter through Patreon or you've never left stars or a review. The fact that you're just listening is amazing. And so thank you for returning. And if it's your first time, this is definitely a bizarre introduction to the podcast. And I think it'll be just fine for you getting into this. And so this is Kathryn Solie and I walking down the poison path, taking in the nightshade perfumes and giving some well-deserved praises to Dale Pendell. I still want to do a tribute to him, but I guess this is an accidental one. Enjoy. Kathryn, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I thought you would be a very appropriate person to talk to about a subject I've never talked about on the podcast, but is one that I'm very passionate about, which is the poison path. And it's a phrase that I don't think a lot of people are usually familiar with, but yet everyone is on it. That's the first thing I'll say. Everyone's on the poison path, whether they know it or not. And I first learned about this idea from Dale Pendell, one of my favorite writers, humans in general, even though I never met him in person. And I've just really adopted it, like a lot of his language and a lot of his concepts around this. And then when you and I met, which strangely wasn't in Boulder, like when you worked at Kucha, the tea house, we never met, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you had brought me tea before, probably when I was giving readings, but we never met. And then so how did you find me? Was it like, did Sherry point you my way? Like, how did it happen?
No, well, that was another funny thing. It was someone recommended your podcast about the Galactic Center to me because I have a lot of stuff there. And then I listened to it and I was like, wow, this is really good. And I listened to some more episodes. And then I went to your website and I was like, oh, I remember this guy from when I worked at Kucha. And then a few months later, I met Sherry through, we were both planning this threshold ceremony for our mutual friend and did that whole thing with her. And then a week or two after, I was driving and listening to your podcast and it was an episode with her. And I was like, oh my God, it's the same person. And right when I thought that, she actually texted me to talk about Datura poison. Poison plant. So
plant people
interesting webs.
like, yeah, plant people like planet people, they find each other. And there's a wonderful botanical network that seems to bind all of us. And I think about that a lot for myself because I'm a bit of both. Like plants brought me to planets, and now it's come full circle, being that I'm running these plants and planets retreats. And not that I want to pick a team. That's not what I'm doing here. But I would say, like fundamentally, I'm a plant person first.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I was thinking about it before we got on, like because I was flipping through Dale's book, Pharmacopoeia. By the way, everyone will probably be referencing this book. It's the tome to the botanical dimensions. It's the great work for plants. Dale Pendell is the mouthpiece of all things green and flowering. He's amazing. And yeah, like there's just a feeling, Kathryn, that I get when I'm learning about plants or I'm around them. And Dale has this way, and I suppose that's what poetry does, of just transporting me very quickly into a space that I'm so deeply familiar with. And it's not that I don't feel that with plants when I'm engaged with astrology, but I don't feel it in the same way with, say, the planet community, whether it's astronomy or astrology. I feel it with plant people more than I do with planet people, if that makes sense. What is that? What do you think that is? I'm trying to articulate something that I just kind of had an epiphany of.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely a plant person. Astrology is kind of just something I would love to understand better, but it's just been like in the periphery of my life for many years. But so I can definitely speak to the plant part. And Dale Pendell, I think what's so great about him is the way that he writes about plants. You know that he's in relationship to the plant. He's not talking about the plant. He's
Yes.
speaking the plant's language. And his books really are unique in that, there are definitely Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer-Wall is also a wonderful book where she's speaking for the plants. And there's a lot of people that do that. Stephen Herod Buhner also to some
Yes.
extent.
Of course.
Lots of people, but Dale Pendell does it, and like you can just tell he doesn't or he didn't care about how he would be perceived by academics. He wanted to speak his experience of plants, and he let the plants teach him. He actually worked with the plants, and that's a major complaint that I have about some of the people working with entheogenic or poisonous plants right now, is that I feel like there's a lot of people, and I listen to them and I read what they have to say, and I can tell that they're not actually working with the plants. They're just talking about them or learning about them and just kind of sharing data and not actually speaking to the plants themselves. And that feels really, really important to understand. And it's probably the same thing with astrology. Like the planets are communicating to us, and we can, learn a lot about them through books, but I bet you can learn a lot more by turning your ears towards them and listening to what they have to say themselves, which might sound like woo-woo spiritual nonsense talk, but I've found, and I know now hundreds of people that I've watched have this experience with plants, that they are communicating to us all the time. And our ancestors knew this.
Oh, they knew. They definitely knew. And also how a tree could be a person and how all these things are threaded. Yeah, I think we just fell into the main vein where the pulse is strongest with this stuff, because like what you talk about with Dale, that's one of the most fascinating things about it, because he does have the intellectual background. He does have the poetic skills. He has the deep reservoir of wisdom, and like he has this Aries spirit of not giving two fucks about what anyone thinks. And like he creates his own, I don't want to say syntax, but definitely form. Like I remember the first time I opened the book, I'm like, what is this? This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. And I think it took me 2 or 3 visits back to it because he kept coming up. People kept mentioning him, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a moment with not even his first, it was Pharmaconosis, which is the third of the trilogy, that I read a chapter in it that it was the most alive piece of prose I've ever read. Like it was so animated, and because I was familiar as well with the plant, it was eerie in the transmission. And then when you learn about like how he wrote the books, I mean, yeah, like when he was writing those chapters, he was alone. He was in the mountains. He had friends bringing him food in his library and everything that he needed. And so he was completely immersed within that plant's consciousness. And it doesn't really require belief, what you said about do plants speak. It's not about belief at all. It's about knowing how to have the encounter. And then it's absolutely undeniable when you have that experience. And I would say, yes, that is true with planets as well. And that's one of the greatest problems, I think, in the pursuit of studying astrology, is people get really caught within the books or the methods or these techniques and theories, which they're all helpful. They're all there for a reason, just like we need techniques in alchemy or herb craft. It has to be there, but there is absolutely a point where you have to shut the books and engage fully with the planet, which really is a god, right? Like with plants, it's a botanical dimension. There's spirits in there, whether you call that a god or not. But you like when you contact it, then it's an ever existing intelligence that like is constantly teaching you. Like every time I look at a chart, it's a call and response. Like I'm looking at it, I know how to read it, but then it's speaking to me as well. And that's how I think it works with the plants. Yeah.
Yeah. Call and response for sure. And the way that the plants will meet us wherever we are. So I find, for me personally, the more that I process my own traumas, the more that I meet myself, the more that I know myself in deeper and deeper ways, the more that I can hear the deeper messages of the plants without the gauze of conditionings.
Gauze. There's wounds beneath that gauze. Where do they come from? School?
I
Culture?
mean, from early childhood experiences and all the way to birth. If you're born, that's a very traumatic experience. You go
For
from
those
being
who aren't born, what happened?
the unborn floating beings listening.
True.
But yeah, you go from being in the womb where everything is, your needs are all merged with, everything is taken care of. And then suddenly all the fluid drains and you're pushed through a tiny birth canal with 50, 60 pounds of pressure on your little infant body. And then usually in our culture, pulled out in a violent way with bright lights. And, we all have, I'm sorry to laugh about it, but we all have that initial imprint. I'm just laughing thinking about a lot of times when I'm teaching, a lot of the work that I do is talking about trauma, because poisonous plants tend to bring us in contact with the trauma. And I always kind of feel I have to be the one to give this information, to be like, oh, guess what? We all have trauma.
We're all traumatized. Even if it came in through the sun.
The role I want to be in.
Right?
Through the...
Oh, it's just a funny way I like to think about
the
it, because
sunroof.
that's how I came in. Yeah, it wasn't planned, but I was like, my spirit was clear at birth. Like I didn't want to do it the right way. So I was all backwards and tangled and such. And so they had to take me through a cesarean section.
Yeah.
And that's traumatic in its own way, but that pressure on my little infant body wasn't there.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I'm so soft.
Yeah.
Not like my body.
Kinds. Yeah. Yeah.
So trauma, yes. And you say poisonous plants bring us in contact with trauma. Now, there's a lot of things I could inquire around that one. What do you mean by that phrasing?
Well, so if we think about like what we were just speaking about, that plants are conscious, that they have a certain consciousness that they're emanating, and we can listen and hear the messages that are coming off of any plant, any tree, fungi. If you think about, for example, a rose, everyone knows rose, and probably everyone loves roses, that smell, and there's lots of positive associations for people with roses, like it's associated with love. There's this feeling of protection. It has these thorns. A lot of people, when they meet the spirit of rose, there's this feeling of divinity. Very, that is the emanation of rose. That's the spirit of rose, and that's something that probably everyone listening would be familiar with. Love, protection, that kind of thing. But when we think about the spirit of a poisonous plant, it's a little bit different. a rose, it's edible, it's medicinal. Something like, say, datura, which also a lot of people are probably familiar with. If you're not, I highly recommend looking right now, if you can, at a photo of datura. Really beautiful, beautiful flower, smells divine, heavenly, and it's very poisonous. It can be used medicinally as well, but in the proper context. So when we touch in with the spirit of a poisonous plant, it's a totally different kind of feeling than that of the rose. If you meet the spirit of datura, for example, I've had many experiences where I'm in my own process working through something difficult, and the spirit of datura will kind of appear there and walk me through, help me through this.
Do you have visual when that happens? Like, do you know what datura spirit looks like for you?
Yeah, I'll say that for everyone, it can look differently. All the plant spirits can look differently. And some people will experience visually. Some people will get a body sensation. Some people will hear words. Some people will see colors or patterns, or just have like a gut feeling, a knowing. So there's not, if you don't have visuals when you start to touch into the consciousness of plants, that doesn't mean that you're not actually doing it. Everyone is different. But I've found pretty consistently that the spirit of datura feels like a grandmother spirit to me, like a gentle, wise old woman who just wants to like wrap me up in her shawl and take me with her. And every so often, she will show me just a split-second flash of a very wrathful face, like, don't forget who I am.
Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga. Mm-hmm. And in leading people in journeys with the Torah, with the spirit of the Torah, not with ingestion. Please don't ingest the Torah. But that kind of archetype shows up for a lot of people, of this grandmother kind of archetype. And when we go and look at traditional cultures that have been working with the Torah, there's a lot of names that, have translate to grandmother or little white hair. I think that there is like an individual experience of the plant spirits, but there's also an overarching kind of feeling to them as well. Probably the same with planets, that, when you gave me that reading recently, and you talked about my Mars being strong, I had a hard time with that because I don't resonate with the things that I've read about Mars energy. But since then, I was sitting with it and feeling like, oh, I just have a feminine expression of Mars, and that's not always talked about.
It's a good point. Mars isn't just a ripped Spartan, right? Like the image that most people get. I mean, traditionally Mars rules over Scorpio and Aries, and it's in the Scorpio context that lands us very securely on the poison path again. Like, it takes great courage to even step foot in the devil's garden. So we'll explore that. But like with the work you're doing with poisonous plants, like that is an easy beginning to the translation that you have a strong Mars. Like, who in their right mind would choose a career with poisonous plants, for example?
I did not choose this.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it chose you for sure. I love it.
Yeah.
And on datura, I have a quick question, that I want to share a really fun datura story with you that just happened. So does this apply, like, as far as the spirit you're talking about of being a grandmother with datura, to both datura anaxia and brumancia, like both versions of datura?
I would say so. Brugmansia it's technically not a datura. It used to be classified as a type of datura, even though it's called like tree datura. And I do feel like they're definitely similar. Just Brugmansia, or it's sometimes called angel's trumpet too, is just a little bit more intense about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So my
A little
story
bit
ends
more
up-
wrathful.
I've seen it, yeah, and both
Mhm.
both big encounters. Because like here in Boulder, you're probably familiar with the anoxia version, which grows here.
Mhm.
And there was actually a phase. I'm not going to tell this whole story, but there was a phase right when I moved here where it was kind of everywhere. Like even at
Mhm.
Naropa, there was
Mhm.
tons of datura everywhere.
Yeah.
And then these high school kids ate a bunch of the seeds and were all hospitalized.
Mhm.
And all the datura disappeared.
Oh.
In Boulder, but it's back. Like there's a couple spots where I go and visit it every year. It really was. It was like when you'd walk down Pearl Street, like it was an ornamental, and then it wasn't. So the story was when we were just in Peru. I did a Plants and Planets retreat in Tarapoto, and the curandera that we were working with, datura is one of her plants, right? And outside of the little casita that I was staying in, there was a very young datura plant that it looked like it was planted with a cutting. Like it was about as tall as me. And there was these fresh flowers on it when we arrived. And I didn't know that there was that. I'm pretty sure, Laurie, if you're listening, like correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that was the first time that particular plant flowered, like right when we arrived. And then Reina, our curandera, she was just thrilled with this. And, part of her ritual is like smoking her mapacho and datura every night. And so the energy of that plant was all over the land that we were on. And I personally love the plant myself. Like I would never ingest it, but I just really love being around it. And also I'm from Florida. Well, I was born there and went to acupuncture school there, and there's a lot of it there as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, for everyone, like if you haven't been around this plant, like just stick your face in it. It's so it's so
Carefully.
good. Yeah, just give a good sniff. Like you gotta get under there. But yeah, it was basically the point of the story. It was a datura blessing when we arrived, and it ended up being the best retreat that I've ever done. So good. So yeah, old grandmother.
Yeah,
And that was her. So
yeah, the spirit of, well, I relate to them as spirits, but those plants, datura and brugmansia, I find that the vast majority of people who come to my work come because of those plants. Those plants are calling a lot of people right now.
Do you feel it's because a lot of folks are recognizing their trauma and wanting to move through it? Is that why? Or is it just the Harry Potter generation is coming too, and they're trying to figure out the mandrake thing?
Right. Yeah, that's real lore, by the way, that if you pull the mandrake out of the ground, the scream will kill you. That's actual plant lore from way back in the day. So I don't know. I think a lot of people just see a picture or come across this plant and say, oh my God, this is the most beautiful plant I've ever seen, and they want to learn more about it. And but I feel on a more unseen level that plant is calling us right now, because our world, we're living in a dark age right now, in a lot of ways. And I know that that's not really talked about, but there's a lot of heaviness and darkness. And I'm not just talking about coronavirus. I mean, in general, things are not in harmony. And what I've felt from the poisonous plants, and why I think they're just exploding for a lot of people right now, is that if we don't individually process our traumas, we are not going to make it out of this. We have to take the plunge, go into our shadows and meet these wounds that we've been holding our whole lives, that prevent us from, first of all, seeing who we really are, hearing who we really are, and knowing what the real reason that we're here, like the way that we're supposed to be of service to this planet. It makes it so that we're easily manipulated by all the lies that we're being told all the time, and the big lie is, that this is all normal, right? That this is just the way that the world is. It's not normal. It hasn't been normal for thousands of years, and it keeps getting more and more intense. We keep going just to this running towards our collective destruction. But I've found time and time again in my own work and people close to me and my students' work that when they work with these plants, and these plants are like a safe entryway into that darkness in ourselves. It's they're holding our hand, they're guiding us there. It's not like we're being thrown off of a cliff. It's not like getting smacked into the back of the head with a 2x4. It's like this gentle, okay, like we're gonna go see what's here. And it's time that we do this work, all of us. And that's what the plants told me a few years ago when I started like really seriously studying them. They said, our time has come. And I didn't fully know what that means. And I still don't think I fully see what that will mean in the future. But whether it's through plants or other channels that bring us towards ourselves, which we have to, like any mythological journey, we, hero's journey or the Persephone journey, or, we have to go through these gates, these challenges. We have to walk towards our wounds and let them, let ourselves feel them and let them process through us. And it just, the more that I'm working with these plants, the more that I'm seeing they're doing this for the collective, not just so that we all feel better, like on a personal level. It's like, this isn't superficial work. This isn't self-indulgent work, when we're processing our trauma. This is necessary. This is necessary work for us to be able to continue living on this little planet here.
I love it. Yes. And what I want to add is what I'll say to this. What I want to add to it is I'm feeling that maybe someone listening, or maybe a few, are a little confused around the poison path right now. Like, wait, you're talking about datura, talking about these dangerous plants, and they're going to help us work with our trauma? Like, how? And how are they on time? And so what I want to add to this is like my own understanding of the poison path, the way I work with it as well. When I said at the beginning how everyone's on their own poison path, it's like, well, first of all, for those of you listening that can't start your day without a cup of coffee, like there's a start, right? It's like you're poisoning yourself every morning, right? But every time you put any alkaloid rich substance into your body, we could say any plants, but like let's focus on the psychoactive ones, cacao, tea, coffee. Like these are totally sanctioned by our cultures, and there's a constant consumption of them, and it's changing consciousness. And it's really interesting to look at a culture that praises literally one that's called spirits and doesn't do anything for the spiritual path. And that's totally okay. And of course, coffee. And like just those two alone that are totally praised within Western cultures, well, really all major first world cultures, it's everywhere. like that's something that you need to look at. And I point everyone to Terrence's book, Food of the Gods, that covers this in a really beautiful way as well. But then you look at cultures that don't have much of a relationship to any of those, right? It's like Europeans didn't have any relationship to tobacco or cacao or coffee until they raped and pillaged and brought it back, right? And it's really interesting to study, like, well, what happened when those plants and those spirits entered European consciousness? It's a very interesting way of studying history. Right? Because there's no respect of tobacco, there's no respect of cacao, there's no respect of coffee. It's just abuse, and it ruins people. And so, like, I'm in the camp that like everything is poisonous, but also nothing is poisonous, like Paracelsus says. So it's and it's not just a moderation thing, it's proper relationship. What are you consuming, and why do you have a relationship to this stuff? And so I just wanted to do this to clarify for everyone that the poison path, like, we're all on it. It's just that you, Kathryn, have really walked down like this interesting corridor into the devil's garden, and you are hanging out. And what does beneficium vifictium actually mean, by the way? What does that term mean?
I think it's like bad. I'm not positive. I think it just means like bad magic or something like that.
Oh, really? So Daniel Schulke named his book Bad Magic?
Well, maybe I'm wrong.
It might just like relate to like the occult, the darker shades of witchcraft and magic. Anyways, we're referencing this book that I have not read in full, so I can't really talk about it, but talk about the Datura, that art on the cover of it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we were talking earlier before the podcast about Nevada City. That artist who did that lives in Nevada City also.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of plant people in Nevada City holding it down. That, Dale Pendell, Gary Schneider. So anyways, like, I'm just curious of, like, you said that you didn't choose it, and maybe like a tad of an origin story of like what pulled you into that domain, but also like, what does it look like when you're working with them, with folks? Like, what are you teaching your students?
Well, my origin story sounds like a superhero.
That's okay.
Not my story. Doesn't sound like a superhero story, but that term, origin story. But I think I've just always, like, I came into this place just being like pretty comfortable with death and like things that people are usually afraid of. And that's not learned from my parents at all. Or from the greater culture. Sorry.
Strong Mars. Go on.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And being like, I remember being a little kid and being very confused and disturbed that my parents did not want to talk to me about the roadkill. Like, they didn't want to talk to me about things that were dying, or the smoke coming out of the truck on the highway, or, you know, these kind of, it's like, why don't people talk about this? It was very confusing because I wanted to understand, like, why does this exist in our world? And I think our whole society is very death phobic. I mean, we're definitely seeing that now. And, you know, it's that disconnect from the greater cycle of life. But so, yeah, came in with it. And then as a teenager, I tried to self-initiate with certain poisons, and sort of did in a way, had some like very painful and difficult years. And I find that a lot of folks on this poison path have similar stories of trying to self-initiate as teenagers or in their early 20s. And because we live in a culture that does not initiate us, right? And And then, and also as a kid, I was talking to plants, and that is not, I'm not special. If you watch any child outside alone, they'll start talking to plants. It's very natural for us to be doing that. But I didn't get it conditioned out of me, luckily. And then in my late 20s, I went to, or my mid 20s, I went to herbalism school, and my first weekend at herb school, my teacher invited us to go sit with one of these plants on the land. And as she was giving us these instructions, she was standing next to this plant that I didn't know what it was, but I was feeling this extremely strong pull towards this plant, and was almost panicking that someone else was going to sit with it before I had the chance to. And they did, and I got to go sit with this plant, and had this experience with this plant of just sitting with it and speaking with it and listening to them, and basically being told, this is where you're going to be doing your work.
What was the plant?
Hellebore.
Hellebore.
Hellebore is also known as Christmas rose. It's a pretty common landscaping plant.
Saturn ruled.
Saturn ruled, yes, as many of these plants are considered.
The poison plants, yeah.
The poison plants, yes. And then I just, once that experience happened, I got kind of obsessed. I had like a year of herb school and almost had little interest in all the plants that we were talking about, because I just, and we didn't really cover poisons in that course. So I did my final project on 5 plants, nightshade plants, belladonna, datura, henbane, mandrake, and brugmansia, and hellebore, which is not in the nightshade family. And that's, since then it's just been one synchronicity after another. And I've been shocked, frankly, by how many people want to study these plants or work with them or learn about them. Because when I started to try to teach the first workshop on this, I was thinking, nobody's going to come to this. This is such a niche topic. This is, people are afraid to go towards the shadow, to go towards poison, right? And that was not the case at all. It's been just like exploded in the almost 2 years that I've been teaching. I've been just completely blown away. Like, their time has really, really come. And to answer your other question about, what do we do in my classes? We talk about the plants to some extent. We talk about their medicinal use, their historical use, lores and myths associated with them. But first and foremost, we're doing plant spirit journeys. So we're each week welcoming in one particular plant spirit and not ingesting anything. I give people the option if they want to work with a flower essence, which is very safe as long as they're prepared properly. You can have a poisonous plant flower essence, or you can work topically with this plant medicine, again, as long as it's prepared properly. So it's really important that if you're going to be sourcing essences or topical treatments like oils or salves, that you're getting them from people who know what they're doing. Because I'm seeing a lot of people starting to make medicine who are not ready to be doing that. And I've heard some bad stories about that. But
Sherry makes good datura, by the way. Everyone.
Oh, topical?
Flower essence. It's a spagyric that I have. I have it right next to me, actually. Right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, but I also, you don't have to have either of those. That's the amazing thing about plant spirit communication, is that it's available to us anytime, any place. You don't even have to know what the plant looks like. You don't have to have ever met the plant in real life. You don't ever have to have worked with the medicine of the plant. If you are open and welcoming to the spirit of this plant, they will come to you. And I've seen that again, time and time again, in a way that still kind of blows me away. Every time that I leave this journey, there's these consistent experiences that people have across each class, and within the same class, there's these threads that get woven through these journeys. It's pretty amazing.
I would agree. I think that like this form of communication is lost on us through our phones, right? Like we all have a way of communicating in a way through telekinesis, plants, planets, with each other, with so many realms really that we just kind of forgotten. And you say that these plants have come like it's their time. And like I would say there's a huge boom, and there's a way of tracking it astrologically as well, with not just the poison path, but with astrology and magic and tarot, and all of this is like coming full circle. It's like, yeah, it's been around for the last couple 100 years again, but really in the past decade, like in my observation since 2012, to be completely clear, like there's been this incredible surge. And one of the clearest ways of recognizing that is not just in like book sales or the amount of podcasts that are out there on herbalism and astrology, but just like talk about the power plants, right? Like, and we throw this into the poison path category as well. Like, I think like the story of ayahuasca is such an interesting one, because it kind of came within Western consciousness in the mid 20th century. Richard Schulte's, his work, but also like the Yahe letters from Ginsberg and Burroughs, like that whole thing. And then like thanks to Terence and many others, like it began in the 80s and 90s to become more aware and like to plant people and in these communities. And then here we are in 2020. And I don't know if I know anyone in my personal life who hasn't sat in an ayahuasca ceremony. Like those vines have literally left the jungle and curled themselves around everything on the planet. And it's very interesting to me because of essentially what happens in an ayahuasca ceremony. I mean, you're initiated into the botanical dimension. Like if you're paying attention to what's happening, I mean, that's kind of what's going on. Like, and two of my favorite subjects happen in that. And, you know, when I talk about this, I'm not saying everyone needs to be in an ayahuasca ceremony, but it is like a mother of the plant world in a way. And there are snakes, and there is, you know, the entire botanical world that you have access to. And so two of my favorite things enter. And what's interesting about that, and like it's funny it's coming up now because like it's something I really wanted to talk about with you, is like because Saturn always relates to the poisonous plants, it seems. Yet in Vedic astrology, Rahu, the north node of the moon, is very specific around a lot of the poisonous plants. And being that I know Rahu, the dragon's head, more intimately than most things in astrology, it makes so much sense with the kind of what Sherry calls like the heroic healer archetype, like people who do self-initiate with power plants and do, you know, call themselves shamans and stuff like this. And how in a way Rahu and Saturn work together, because in a way it's like there's an opening, there's power that enters, but like the lessons, like the forces that you start dabbling with in those realms are so immense that usually it doesn't end well. Right? Like Saturn shows the limitations, and Rahu is this insatiable hunger, like the hunger to be in ceremony all the time, the hunger to constantly be doing more plants and exploring more avenues of consciousness. Like that's the nature of Rahu. Rahu in its greatest shadowy expression is a fiend. And like that fiendish nature that is very much alive in a lot of Western people, just like kind of seeking the experience, is a major problem, I think, with the plant world, but also the planet world. And Saturn's like, stiff-armed, here's your limitation. You never respected me. Now you have lung cancer. It's over. Tobacco's lesson, right? It's like, if you respect me, if you know how to use me, if you praise me, if you pray with me, I'm probably not going to take you out. But if you're like, fuck this, as you're smoking, like I'm going to quit someday, fuck this. It's like, that's your prayer. That's your prayer. And that's not a good prayer to be working with tobacco, because that's the maestro plant as well. And so that's kind of
like those kids that you said, those high school kids that got poisoned with the datura seeds.
Oh, I know. That's a great example, because they were uninitiated little Boulder hippie kids probably. And they're like looking at the little spiky pods. Yeah, I remember it was in October. I lived here for those. And who knows how many seeds they ate. Oh my God. Like, you only need to eat a few, but there's hundreds in a seed pod. They probably they probably each broke open a seed pod and then just tossed it in there like a bunch of Skittles. And then it was over. I don't think any of them died, thank God, but still. Saturn, stiff-armed, but Rahu brought them there. It's interesting. So yeah, all poisonous things, many-legged creatures are Rahu's terrain, and then Saturn constricts and shows limitations. And so it's really interesting to see how they mingle along the poison path, because it's even true with the subtle ones, isn't it, Kathryn? Like, take coffee again. It's like, for myself, I have a very specific limitation with coffee. If I go beyond it, I'm done. Like, it really throws off my blood sugar, and like, it's a strong teacher. And it's a subtle lesson, but like, it's an important lesson for all of us, is to pay attention to our relationship to all these plants and planets. So that was my little moment. I had to get it out.
And you know, when you're talking about ayahuasca really like showing up right now, I totally think there's a connection to the plants that I'm teaching about in ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is, you know, on another level, or at least that lineage is not broken. It's not as broken, we can say. I think that some of these poisonous plants, I mean, sometimes datura and brugmansia, sometimes they're actually added to Aya brews. But it's also the more that I work with these plants, the more that I really believe in my being that these plants were part of shamanic lineages that have been lost. You know, especially, I think a lot about, I'm of European descent, and I've believed like my whole life that people of European descent don't have a shamanic lineage.
Lies.
And yes, lies. It's just been, it got, you know, burned and hanged and drowned out of us. But it's there. It's still there. The seeds are in the soil. And I'm really hoping that a part of this medicine rising right now is that we will find our way back to these other lineages that have different things to teach us, because all of like the classic entheogens or psychedelics, they all kind of take us to the same place, but they all have a different wisdom to them, right? And when we think about how many psychoactive plants are out there that we have forgotten how to work with, it's mind-blowing. Like, the possibilities are great.
Tremendous. Yeah.
And I say that with slight hesitation, because these are poisonous. These are poisonous plants. And if you do not know what you're doing, you can, like with the Torah, for example, I've heard so many stories of people, firsthand stories of people trying to ingest datura and blacking out for days, waking up and they're across the country. They don't know how they got there. Waking up and all the furniture in their house is gone. Waking up and they've smeared their feces all over the walls of their home. They're
The devil's garden.
Yeah, the devil's garden. It's not to be casually. These are not plants to get high with.
No. There's a gradient of difference between the death providing, and some of them, like ayahuasca, can kill you, but not really. Like it's a pretty
have to take
safe
a lot, right?
yeah, and the LD50 of a lot of them, like with psilocybin, LSD, like most of the popular entheogens, like it's almost impossible to die.
Yeah.
So they're safe. But you bring up this great point, like with our tradition, right? It's like, where is it? Like a lot of people think it's lost, and it's not lost. In fact, like I'm just getting into the meat of my girlfriend's dad's book, Elixir in the Stone, which is Michael Bajan's book, amazing history of magic. He also wrote one though on the Inquisition. Have you read that book?
Yeah, I've not heard of him.
Everything that he has done, like, it's just incredible. I bow down to Michael Bajan. Rest in peace, you brilliant man. And yeah, so 2 books that could be very helpful for you and your students because they deal with magic and also what happened during the Inquisition. I love his take on history. We do have a tradition, right? And one of the pieces of it that I have been focusing on for a pretty long time, like the Asclepian piece more the last year, but of like really trying to understand like the Eleusinian mysteries and the Asclepian dream temples. Like those were unbroken traditions for thousands of years. And there is a lot of evidence of what was going on. Like what were they drinking in those initiatory rites, like reenacting the Persephone myth? Like it seems like it was an ergot based medicine, which is a precursor to LSD. It was something, like we don't fully know what it was, but like it was something like that. It was a poison that was involved in the rituals. And like when you think about thousands of years of time, like most of us can't even imagine what it would have been like 100 years ago. I mean, even World War II seems like a hell of a long time ago, right? Because we weren't here. So it's really hard to imagine what that was like. But when you're talking about 1,000 years, like in our own terms, that brings us back to the time of Christ. And then when you think about in that time, like there was Asclepian temples for thousands of years, Eleusinian mysteries for thousands of years. Don't even get me started on ancient Greek, Egypt, right? Like, these are traditions that are so deeply foundational to our humanity that we have to become obsessed with understanding what was going on, because it's our inheritance. Like our ancestors knew something, and there's evidence everywhere, but also there's traditions on the planet that are still practicing. Like there's people that are still maestros of the plant world and also of the planet. Like they understand how all this works. And I think we need to become deeply interested in the origins of our traditions. And so it's really cool that you've devoted yourself to a very alluring and misunderstood corridor of that path. So I want to, on that topic, Kathryn, I'm very curious about you telling us the true story of witches and broomsticks, because everyone wants to know, and you educated me about it.
Well, okay.
You got to do it. You're on the spot.
Get ready. Let's listen up to this lovely tale. So, witches on broomsticks. There's this rumor that this comes from this practice where witches, aka medicine people, were using a witch's flying ointment, a psychedelic salve made from plants such as datura, henbane, mandrake, possibly Amanita muscaria, possibly monkshood. There's all these different recipes out there that basically involve lots of poison. And slathering these broomsticks with them and then using them like inserting them vaginally and like riding the broomstick, and thus the mucous membranes are absorbing these psychoactive plants and putting you into this trance. And the thing about the poisonous nightshade plants is that one of their medicines is that they give you the sensation of flying when you work with them physically. So even if you're using like a topical oil or salve, if you use the proper dose, you will have this feeling of lightness, of possibly like, oh, am I about to fly off my seat? So there's, clout in that story that, okay, this might be true. But all of those tales that we have about that come from the witch trials, where people, mostly women, but also men, were being tortured and being fed these stories like, did you kiss the devil's anus, like over and over again until they finally say, yes, I did. Yes, I did. While they're being tortured. So they're being fed these stories. Did you ride the broomstick over and over again until they finally confess, yes, I did. And even then, I don't even think that there's actually a written account of that, like riding the broomstick. I think it was what you might call fake lore instead of folklore, fake lore.
I like that.
Yeah, but I will say that I believe that there is a grain of truth in that. I think that people were using these plants shamanically. I think they were using them for astral projection. That flying sensation, what is that? It's astral projection if you work with it. So also, I don't believe it's safe to put these plants on your mucous membranes. I have only tried with mandrake, but from what I've read, it can cause burns. It's not something you probably want to be experimenting with. And it works just as well to just put it on your pulse points. So, but
yeah, I really hope, that someone doesn't listen to this and be like, oh, that's actually a really great idea. let me try that with my dildo. Let's just see if it works.
Yeah,
Say it again. It's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea. You can give yourself far too much, and just, these are sacred plants. They're not to be used recreationally.
Yes, a lot of disclaimers now that we're at this point of the conversation.
It's constant for me. You would not believe how many emails and DMs I get almost every day from people asking me, how do I eat datura?
Oh dear. I mean, myself, like, I had one of the oddest nights of dreams ever when I had the flowers beneath my pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the colors in my dreams and just like the tone of my dreaming. It was and this is before I was like truly initiated on the poison path. I was like young when I did that, and it was visceral.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that plant is business, dark business. Like, I'm not sleeping with it under my pillow without advice.
Yeah, and there's lore that says that if you fall asleep under a brugmansia tree, that you can go permanently mad.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen
you could.
For sure. I mean, did you happen to see the Vice documentary on how datura is being used in South America to rob people?
I think I saw it many, many years ago for the scopolamine, like they were extracting it possibly.
Perhaps, yeah. And
like the powder, blowing it into people's faces.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things. It's kind of like a date rape drug where they will do it to people and then get them to bring them home and give them the keys to their house and just like rob them blind. But then, they let them in. And so even if there's like security footage and all that stuff, it's totally cordial. It's like, you let me in, you gave me all this stuff. It's all good. Thanks. But you did dose me with datura.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they're extracting a tropane alkaloid called scopolamine, which is used. Actually, there's a lot of tropane alkaloids that are extracted from these poisonous nightshade plants that are used in, quote unquote, modern medicine or allopathic medicine for things like drying up your mucous membranes before surgery. If you've ever had your pupil dilated, you probably had atropine, which comes from belladonna, or a deadly nightshade. Motion sickness patches,
Dramamine?
all kinds of things. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
I took Dramamine once, like to get
Mm-hmm.
high, right? Like, I don't know if you remember that one, but like as like
No,
in
I
high
didn't
school.
ever get there.
Yeah, I had this friend who was like that guy, the one that was always pushing the envelope and like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
try this, Adam, try this. And one weekend it was Dramamine. And that was one of the worst experiences ever. Like there was nothing to take away from that. Like I'll never do that again.
What was it like?
Like my initial memory of like the onset of the experience was kind of like there was a spot we all hung out by the river and we would just socialize, play hacky sack, do what 17-year-old hippie kids do.
Mm-hmm.
And like the entire earth like pretty much rose to my hips, so it felt like I had no motion in my legs. So I was like hip deep in the earth and I couldn't walk, and so it was very challenging for me to get back in the car. And then it was very, very blurry, all of it. Like I just remember getting home and then having a really hard time getting into my bed, and then just laying there forever and be like, this is something I'll never do again, right? Like Saturn again, stiff armed, like the silly things that we do as kids to get that altered state.
Yeah, and then if we were in a culture that was intact, we all would have been initiated at some point, which so many cultures have these initiations for both boys and girls, like entering puberty, that involve taking Datora.
Yeah. It's there. Yeah. Well, not Dramamine though. I mean, I don't think there's any tradition around
I don't think so.
Much Dramamine.
But maybe anything can be worked with in the proper context.
I suppose. Yeah, there's some NyQuil shamans out there, I can guarantee it. In like the hills of West Virginia. Some DM shamans. Don't DM Kathryn if you are a DM shaman. She probably doesn't want to hear from you in your stories. That's so judgmental. I don't mean that. But.
Well, I'm familiar. I mean, that was part of my teenage experience. Yeah.
Well, the poison path. How fun. So, yeah, I have really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm just curious because probably a lot of people are like, how can they learn more? I mean, are you writing? Do you have your own podcast, vlog where you're talking about all this? Like, what is your way of pointing people to this?
I'm pretty active on Instagram, and my handle there is Persephone's Path, which, Persephone is the Greek goddess of both springtime and flowers, and also queen of the underworld. I teach classes. I have a 6-week course all about poisonous plants that I teach about 2 or 3 times a year. There's a level 1 and a level 2, and there's probably going to be a level 3 starting next year. The next there's a current round happening now that's totally full. Please don't ask me if you can join. I feel guilty when I have to say no. But there's another round starting in September, and I'm also on Patreon, and I make little video classes there every month. I also have a website that I sell many different poisonous plant flower essences. I think that's all the places.
Incredible. Persephone's Path. And website?
It's my name, KathrynSolie.com.
Yes. Well, I'm sure the plants are quite content with the work that you're doing. And I just want to thank you as well for giving me an opportunity to talk about the poison path. It's been far too long. I don't think, I mean, when Dale died a couple of years ago, funny timing actually, because my buddy Josh, who's also been on the podcast before, I'm like on the verge of going on a walk with him in like an hour. And we wanted to do a tribute to Dale. Maybe we still will at some point. But like, I love Dale's work so much that like I would drop everything to like do a documentary on him or something. Like I really appreciate him that much. Yeah. He's so incredible.
I love that appreciation.
Yeah, you know the feeling. It's like when you find your favorite centaur. You find your favorite centaur, you're like, wow, you have like you've walked the path that I am now walking, and it's a really great recognition to have in people. It took me a long time to realize that with Dale. I was like, wow, he really has shown like a way to live, and like you said, of like not caring about accolades or what anyone thinks about, but also just living a simple life in the hills, taking care of plants. He made a lot of his income through just trees. Like he grew a bunch of trees. I'm pretty sure, and then wrote books. It's like, wow, that's a good life, Dale. I like it. So anyway, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about all these people that have just been hanging out deep in my subconscious.
Yeah, he had a lot of integrity, and when you find those sadly very rare teachers who have integrity and wisdom, hold on to them.
Yes. We were just talking about this in a podcast I recorded yesterday. It's so rare. It is so rare, and it's a riddle, I think, because you kind of have to find them, because if like they're right in your face, or they're like the uber famous type thing, like everyone knows their name, like you have to be like very careful around that, because Rahu brought that.
That's like the shadow work. Like if we're going to be, continuing on this planet and transforming to make a world that is hospitable and healthy and nourishing for all beings, we're going to have to, let go of the part of ourselves that's like, well, if I become a spiritual teacher, I can make a lot of money, and I can, these voices are in all of us. They're very, very quiet, but they're there. And if we can process that, then, service becomes number one. And
gold.
Yeah.
It is like to weave it in to what we were saying about the poison path in regards to the planets, Saturn and Rahu. Rahu is that spirit, right? In Western culture, it is celebrated, right? How many likes he got? How many viewers? How many followers?
Oh my God.
It's fueled, right? Like most of us at some point fall susceptible to it. It's like it's a viral meme that gets in there, and it's Rahu, in my opinion, that does that. Now, what's interesting is because Rahu relates to infectious and poisonous things. It also relates to gambling and getting ahead in the world, nepotism. You get the idea. Like that spirit is so dangerous, because like when everyone, like you do know the name of someone because like they're all over the place, their faces everywhere. It's like, well, to get there, like you have to be riding on the back of that fiendish dragon.
Yeah.
And it's such a good teacher, because, even putting yourself out there, like it's a dose of Rahu, because there's a desire there. There's a little bit of ego there. I'm not going to lie. That's why I have a podcast. I like sharing these ideas. I think people should get these ideas, right? Like I enjoy talking about them just like you do. And like, I want to spread the information. There's a dose, but in the same way, like with the poisonous plants, it's like dosage is everything, right? It's just like, why are you doing it? Is it service, or is it fulfilling something else?
Yes.
Like
really important questions to be asking ourselves, and to be asking of the people that we're unconsciously or consciously pedestaling as teachers. Are they walking their talk? Are they manipulating in unconscious ways? Are they using spiritual ideas to their benefit? Are they bypassing? I mean, it's a real sickness in spiritual communities and herbalism communities that is disturbing to me, frankly. Very disturbing.
Yeah, I don't think, and here's one of the great mysteries to me. I think about this one often. Like when that energy is present in the plant world, right? And say they're using something like ayahuasca or a cactus. I think it's one of the great mysteries of life is how those plants, because there is a consciousness in them, right? How those plants don't set those people straight. And it also covers the idea that also gets around of like, well, if Trump just took ayahuasca, everything would be different. So, no, sorry.
Yeah, it's like, are you taking ayahuasca or other entheogens or psychedelics? I think a lot of people are like, if you have trauma come up, that's bad. That means it's a bad spirit. I have to get this bad spirit out of you, or it's a bad trip. And it's like, you should really want to have a bad trip, because that's the only way you're going to process your shit and become yourself.
Invite the bad trip. That'll be the name of this podcast.
I stand behind that very strongly.
Yeah, there is no bad trip. No, for sure. I agree with that too.
Yeah, invite the bad trip. Yeah.
Well, that's something to live by. Thank you for walking beautifully through the devil's garden, Kathryn, and sharing these ideas with us. I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find you and take their own confident steps into the poison path, even though they're already on it. Everyone, you're already on the poison path. You just maybe didn't know that yet. And so beautiful. Well, I hope that the final turning of this pandemic is graceful for you, and enjoy your summer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam, for having this podcast and bringing together all these different voices and sharing your voice and these important messages that need to get to the collective. Appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. I like talking about these subjects very much. So it comes naturally. Well, thanks again. Have a beautiful night. And so there you go. The poison path. Maybe you knew you were on it. Maybe you didn't. But now you have some context, right? And maybe you just got turned on to Dale Pendell as well in his absolutely unbelievable alchemical garden of his mind. I can't recommend his trilogy enough. It's so good. And if you want to visit Kathryn, once more, KathrynSolie.com. And she also has a Patreon, just like myself. I can't believe that it wasn't robo-tripping, that story. That was a Dramamine story from when I was like 16 or 17 years old. Maybe that's what's wrong with me, experimenting with things like that, thanks to my Neil Cassidy friend. Definitely my Neil Cassidy. I always think about him. And it's funny because Kerouac had that book called Visions of Cody, and that indeed was his name, my friend's name in high school. He's still with us. Don't talk about him in past tense like that. But anyhow, yeah, that could be what's wrong with me, that horrendous experience. But hey, there are no bad trips. You learn from all of them, don't you? And so I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you want to hear more, I did a podcast just yesterday with one of my dearest friends, Alec Brogan, about human design, and that's only available on my Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/AdamSummer, every single pledge level gets access to the Patreon only. There's up to 40 of them at this point. Also the astrology of Bitcoin and how to get started in crypto. It's a good moment, my friends. It is the moment. And so if you are kind of on the fence, those videos are there for you for just $1. I've heard rumors that it's the best $1 that some people had ever spent for just $1. And you even get a chance to win a free reading with me if you go to patreon.com/AdamSummer for just 4 quarters. That's it. And if you don't got those 4 quarters and you don't want to support Kathryn or I through Patreon, no worries. You can go to your podcast app or iTunes, leave some stars or a review. And if you do, again, take a screenshot, send it to me, and you can be a part of the Nodes class, Gemini Sag Edition, this Sunday at 2 o'clock. And so we'd love to have you there. Just a little bit of a symbiotic incentivization right there to support the show. This podcast is brought to you by Solar Fire. Make sure you use SOMA as the code, my friends. I've been hearing some stories of folks that are purchasing Solar Fire and they're not using the code, which is unfortunate for a couple reasons. One, you don't get the class that I made for you. So there's an hour plus long class of how to get the most out of Solar Fire. So if you have ever used the code and you never got the class, just email me and I'll link you to it. And the second reason is you didn't get the 15% discount. That's a lot for an expensive astrology program. So if you use SOMA to get Solar Fire, you get 15% off. Go to their site, alabe.com, to make that happen. This podcast is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. We didn't really talk much about mushrooms or SOMA, but they are definitely a part of the poison path. And the mushrooms that Four Sigmatic is selling on their site don't really apply in the same way, but you could make a stretch to say so, especially when they're mixed with the coffee. And what's great about the Four Sigmatic coffee is that it's not as much caffeine as a regular bean. It's like, I think, 50 milligrams in comparison to the average of 200 plus milligrams of caffeine, and it's mixed with medicinal mushrooms. I highly recommend their coffee, and if you use SOMA to get some of it, you get 10% off of anything on their site. And so that's it. That's the news. I am off. I got a few more things to do before I head off to England and have a beautiful reunion with my sweetie the day the Venus cycle begins. How do you like that? I mean, it's been a brutal journey, but it's kind of poetic. And also, I technically arrive when the nodes, in a mean sense, not true, move into Sag Gemini. So my nodal return begins right when I get back. I'm excited about this. And so the next time you hear my voice, you're going to hear the Dartmoor bird songs in the background. And if those birds aren't singing, you're definitely going to hear the rain because, well, it's a guarantee it'll be one of the two. And when I was thinking, what song should I share to end this podcast, there was one that came on my shuffle on Spotify, and immediately I knew it was a cosmonosis moment because it's called Half Moon Glow, and we are in a half moon right now. Sun's in Gemini, that's me. The moon's in Virgo, that's Kathryn, and Lo Fang with his magic playing this song called Half Moon Glow. So the music that has been in the background is Terje, can't pronounce his last name, Terje Sungit, really good music, I like it a lot. And then this is Lo Fang, Half Moon Glow. Thank you, Kathryn, again for joining me on the podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it as well, and I will talk with you soon enough. Be well and be kind.
Disappear. I have seen how much is still unseen. Half moon glow, what has brought me here? Half awake within a half moon dream. Jungle path that I walked alone. afterglow. I need your light to decide. I wanna fly, but I'm born without wings. I'm up so high, can you still hear me sing? I wanna fly. Only one desire, glowing in the dark. I wanna fly. Only one desire, I will never stop. And I awoke and the only proof that I had was nothing I could explain. The morning light and the morning dew seemed